David had lived in the same city for almost 10 years, yet he still felt like he didn't belong. Every morning, he woke up in his small apartment, drank the same coffee, and took the same bus to the same office. His life was quiet, stable, and very boring. At 26 years old, David worked as an IT support technician. He fixed computers, answered emails, and solved problems that other people didn't want to deal with. He was good at his job, but he didn't love it. What David really loved was photography. Every weekend, he walked through the city with his old camera, taking pictures of streets, people, and forgotten places. He liked moments that felt real and honest. Sometimes, when he looked through his photos at night, he felt close to something meaningful, something he couldn't explain. One evening, while David was editing photos on his laptop, his phone rang. The number was unknown. He almost ignored it, but something told him to answer. "Hello?" he said. There was a short silence on the other end. Then a woman spoke. "David Miller?" she asked. "Yes. Who is this?" "My name is Sarah Coleman. I'm calling from Northbridge." David froze. Northbridge was a small coastal town where he had spent his childhood. He hadn't been back in more than 12 years. "I'm listening," he said carefully. Sarah continued, "Your uncle, Thomas Miller, he passed away last week." David closed his eyes. Uncle Thomas had been the closest thing David had to a father. After David's parents died in a car accident, his uncle took care of him for years. "I'm sorry," Sarah said gently. "I know this is sudden." David swallowed hard. "Why are you calling me?" "There is something your uncle left for you," she replied. "He asked us to contact you if anything happened to him." David felt his heart beat faster. What did he leave? There was a pause. "A house," Sarah said, "and a locked room inside it." David sat back in his chair, confused. "A locked room?" "Yes," Sarah continued. "Your uncle was very clear. Only you are allowed to open it." The call ended shortly after. David sat in silence, staring at the wall. A locked room, a house he hadn't seen in years, a town full of memories he tried to forget. That night, David packed a small bag. He knew one thing for sure. Whatever was waiting for him in Northbridge was about to change his life. The next morning, David boarded an early train to Northbridge. The city slowly disappeared behind him, replaced by open fields, small villages, and long roads that seemed to lead into the past. He sat by the window, holding his camera in his hands, but he didn't take any photos. His mind was too busy. Memories came back without asking. He remembered riding his bike near the sea, helping his uncle fix old furniture, and sitting on the roof of the house at night, listening to waves crash against the rocks. Northbridge had once felt like the center of his world. Now it felt like a place he had run away from. After 3 hours, the train stopped. Northbridge Station. The platform was almost empty. The air smelled of salts and wet wood. The sea was close. David could feel it even before he saw it. Sarah Coleman was waiting near the exit. She was in her early 30s, wearing a dark coat and holding a folder under her arm. "David?" she asked. "Yes," he replied. She smiled kindly. "I'm sorry for your loss. Your uncle spoke about you often." They walked through the town together. Northbridge hadn't changed much. The same small shops, the same narrow streets, and the same old houses stood quietly, as if they were waiting. "Your uncle lived a very private life," Sarah said, "but he took great care of his house." When they arrived, David stopped for a moment. The house looked exactly the same. White walls, blue window frames, and a wooden door with deep scratches near the handle. David remembered making those scratches as a child. Inside, the house was clean but cold. Dust covered some surfaces, but everything was in its place. Sarah handed David a key. "This opens the front door, but not the locked room." David frowned. "Where is it?" Sarah pointed toward the stairs, at the end of the hallway. "Your uncle asked me to give you this as well." She gave him a small metal key, old and heavy. "He said you would know when to use it," she added. After Sarah left, David stood alone in the house. The silence felt loud. He walked slowly from room to room, touching the walls, the tables, the old bookshelf. Finally, he stood in front of the locked door. He placed his hand on it. For a moment, he hesitated. Then he put the key into the lock and turned it. The door opened with a soft click. David stepped inside and immediately knew this room was not just a room. It was a message. The air inside the room felt different, heavier, quieter. David stood still for a moment, letting his eyes adjust to the dim light. Thick curtains covered the only window, and the smell of old paper and wood filled the space. The room was not large, but it was full. Every wall was covered with photographs. Some were framed neatly, others were pinned directly to the wall with small metal clips. They showed the sea, empty streets at night, broken boats, old faces, and places David recognized but never really noticed before. In the center of the room stood a wooden table. On it were several notebooks, a small tape recorder, and an old envelope with David's name written on it in his uncle's handwriting. His hands trembled as he picked up the envelope. Inside there was a letter. "David, if you are reading this, it means I am gone. I am sorry for the secrets I kept from you. This room holds the truth about Northbridge and about your family. Please listen before you decide to leave again." David sat down slowly and pressed play on the tape recorder. His uncle's voice filled the room, older, tired, but clear. "I spent my life watching this town," the voice said. "I took photos not for art, but for memory. Northbridge looks peaceful, but it hides a deep wound." David listened closely. The recording explained that 20 years ago, a large construction company planned to build a factory near the coast. The project promised jobs, but it would also destroy the fishing area that many families depended on. Some people protested. Others disappeared. David's chest tightened. "They said it was accidents, storms, bad luck, but I know better." David picked up one photo. It showed a group of people standing near the sea, holding signs. One of the faces made his heart stop. His mother. His uncle's voice said, "She tried to stop them. Your parents were not victims of chance, David." The room felt smaller. David stood up, his mind racing. If this was true, then everything he believed about his past was wrong. The tape stopped. David looked around the room again. This wasn't just a collection, it was evidence. And suddenly, David understood why his uncle locked this room. Because once the truth was seen, there was no going back. David stayed inside the room for hours, but time felt strange there. The world outside seemed far away, almost unreal. He sat at the wooden table again, slowly opening one notebook after another. Each page was filled with careful handwriting, dates, names, and places around Northbridge. His uncle had been patient, very patient. The notebooks described secret meetings, late-night phone calls, and people who suddenly left town without saying goodbye. There were maps with red circles, showing places near the coast and inside the forest. David recognized some of them from his childhood, but now they looked different, dangerous, even dark. One notebook had a red mark on its cover. David opened it carefully. Inside were newer notes. "These are from the last few years," David whispered to himself. His uncle hadn't stopped. Even when he got older, even when he was alone, he continued watching. Suddenly, David heard a sound downstairs, the front door. Someone was inside the house. His heart began to race. David stood up slowly and listened. Footsteps moved across the living room. They were calm, confident, like the person knew the house well. David hid the notebooks under his jacket and quietly left the room. He walked down the stairs, trying not to make any noise. In the hallway, he saw a man standing near the bookshelf. The man was in his late 40s, wearing a dark coat. He was holding one of the framed photos from the wall. "You shouldn't touch that," David said. The man turned slowly. "I was hoping it was you, David Miller." David's body froze. "Do I know you?" The man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "My name is Richard Hale. I worked with your uncle." David felt anger rise inside him. "Then why are you here without asking?" Richard placed the photo back, because some things don't belong to the dead, and some truths can be very dangerous. David stepped closer. "My parents died because of those truths, didn't they?" Richard's eyes darkened. "Careful," he said quietly. "Digging too deep can destroy lives." David held his ground. "It already destroyed mine." For a long moment, they stared at each other in silence. Then Richard spoke again. "Your uncle made enemies, David, and now so have you." Richard walked past him and stopped at the door. "Leave Northbridge. Forget this room. That's the only way you stay safe." The door closed behind him. David stood alone, shaking. But one thing was clear now. The danger was real, and the truth was still alive. After Richard left, the house felt different. The silence was no longer calm. It was heavy, full of tension. David locked the front door and leaned against it, trying to slow his breathing. His uncle's warning echoed in his mind. "Please listen before you decide to leave again." David returned to the locked room. This time, he didn't hesitate. He placed all the notebooks on the table and began to read carefully, page by page. He needed to understand everything. Fear was still there, but now it mixed with anger and a strong sense of responsibility. One notebook mentioned a name many times: Emily Carter. David remembered her. She used to work at the town library. She was quiet, intelligent, and always kind to him when he was younger. According to the notes, Emily helped his uncle collect information. She copied old town records, newspaper articles, and legal documents. Then, suddenly, her name disappeared from the pages. David checked the last note. Emily stopped coming. She said someone was watching her. David closed the notebook slowly. "She's still here," he said to himself. "She has to be." The next morning, David took his camera and walked into town. He avoided the main streets and stayed alert, watching reflections in windows, listening to footsteps behind him. At the library, an old woman sat behind the desk. "I'm looking for Emily Carter," David said. The woman studied his face for a moment. "She doesn't work here anymore." "Do you know where she is?" The woman lowered her voice. "She lives near the old lighthouse, alone." David thanked her and left. The lighthouse stood at the edge of town, facing the open sea. It looked abandoned, but smoke rose from a small chimney behind it. David knocked on the door. After a long pause, it opened slightly. Emily's face appeared, older, thinner, but unmistakable. "David?" she whispered. "Yes," he replied. "My uncle is gone." Her eyes filled with tears. "I was afraid this day would come, and I was afraid you would come too." David took a deep breath. "I know about the factory, about the lies, about my parents." Emily opened the door fully and stepped aside. "Then," she said quietly, It's time I told you the rest." David stepped inside, and he knew this was the point of no return. Emily closed the door slowly and locked it. The sound echoed through the small house, making David feel both safe and trapped at the same time. The inside of the lighthouse home was warm, filled with the smell of tea and old books. A single lamp lit the room, creating long shadows on the walls. "Sit down," Emily said gently. "This will take time." David sat at a small wooden table while Emily poured tea into 2 cups. Her hands were shaking. "I stayed quiet for many years," she began. "Not because I wanted to, but because I was scared." David nodded. "My uncle was scared too, but he didn't stop." Emily smiled sadly. "He was brave, braver than most of us." She reached into a drawer and took out a folder, thick and worn. "These are copies," she said. "Your uncle asked me to keep them somewhere safe." David opened the folder. Inside were contracts, emails, and meeting notes. They showed clear connections between the construction company, town officials, and illegal payments. Names appeared again and again, including Richard Hale. He wasn't just an employee, he was the bridge between the company and the town. David clenched his fists. "And my parents?" Emily looked at him carefully. "Your mother spoke to the press. Your father collected evidence." David's throat tightened. "Then the accident?" Emily shook her head. "It was never proven, but your parents were followed that night. The room felt too small." "They wanted to silence them," Emily continued, "and it worked." David stood up suddenly, anger burning inside him. "No, it didn't. Not anymore." Emily looked at him with concern. "David, once this becomes public, there is no going back. You could lose your job, your safety." David picked up his camera. "I've been hiding behind photos for years. Now I know what they're for." He looked at Emily. "Will you help me?" She hesitated only for a second. "Yes," she said, "for your uncle and for your parents." Outside, the sea crashed loudly against the rocks. A storm was coming, and this time, David was ready to face it. The storm arrived before midnight. Heavy rain hit the lighthouse windows, and strong wind shook the walls. David stayed the night at Emily's house. Neither of them felt safe enough to sleep. They sat at the table with documents spread out in front of them. "We need to be careful," Emily said. "If we give this to the wrong people, it will disappear." David nodded. "We need someone independent, someone who isn't connected to Northbridge." Emily thought for a moment. "There is a journalist. Her name is Laura Bennett. She works for a national newspaper. Years ago, she tried to write about this case, but she was blocked." David's eyes lit up. "Can you contact her?" Emily picked up her phone. "I already did. She's coming tomorrow." The next day, the storm ended, but tensions stayed. David returned briefly to his uncle's house to collect more evidence. Everything seemed normal, too normal. Then he noticed something. The locked room door was slightly open. His heart dropped. Someone had been there. Drawers were open, some photos were missing, but not all. David grabbed what remained and left immediately. That afternoon, Emily and David met Laura Bennett at a small cafe outside town. Laura was sharp, calm, and direct. "If this is real," Laura said after reviewing the documents, "it's big, very big." "It is real," David replied, "and people have died because of it." Laura leaned back. "Then we don't rush. We do this right." Suddenly, David felt a strange calm. For the first time, he wasn't alone. As they left the cafe, David noticed a familiar face across the street, Richard Hale, watching them. David met his eyes. Richard didn't move. He didn't need to. The message was clear. The game had begun. After meeting Laura, everything moved faster than David expected. Laura returned to the city with copies of the documents, promising to verify every detail. She warned them clearly. "They will feel threatened," she said, "and threatened people make mistakes or dangerous choices." That evening, David walked alone through Northbridge. He wanted to clear his head, but the town felt different now. Friendly faces looked distant. Conversations stopped when he passed. Someone knew. At his uncle's house, David found a note pushed under the door. "You are being watched. Leave now." His hands tightened around the paper. Instead of fear, he felt determination. The next morning, the town council announced a community meeting. David knew it was no coincidence. The room was full. Richard Hale stood near the front, calm and confident. "We must protect Northbridge from false stories," Richard said. "Some people want to damage our reputation." David stood up. "What about the people who disappeared?" he asked loudly. The room fell silent. Richard smiled thinly. "Old rumors." David held up a photo. "My parents were there, protesting." Whispers spread across the room. That night, Emily called David urgently. "Someone broke into my house," she said. "They were looking for the folder." David closed his eyes. This was no longer about history. It was about survival, but also about justice, and David knew stopping now was impossible.